Okay, so today we're going to talk about something truly incredible. It's the story of one woman whose cells, well, they never died. And because of that, they completely changed modern medicine as we know it. But you know what? We're actually going to start near the end of the story. Or maybe it's a new beginning. Just recently, in August 2023, a huge biotech company settled a lawsuit with a family. And this wasn't your typical legal battle, over some new drug or patent. Nope. This was about something that happened more than 70 years ago. So that really brings us to the core question here, the big mystery we're going to unravel. Why on earth is a multi-billion-dollar company paying a family for cells that were taken for free from a woman without her permission way back in the 1950s? I mean, think about that. To figure this out, we need to look at three things: the legal fight, the woman herself, and the absolutely mind-blowing science her body created. All right, let's dive right in. Section 1, that landmark legal battle. This is the stuff that really brought this whole story roaring back into the public eye. Okay, so the legal strategy here is absolutely key. The Lacks family used a concept called unjust enrichment, and their argument was actually pretty simple and really powerful. They basically said, look, this company, Thermo Fisher, is making a fortune off of Henrietta's cells, and they know it. They know exactly whose cells these are. The lawsuit put it bluntly, saying, Black suffering has fueled innumerable medical progress and profit. And wow, it worked. The settlement was a huge deal, a historic first. It was the first time ever that a company had to financially pay the Lacks estate for this. But to really get why that settlement is so important, we have to rewind. We have to go back and meet the person at the very heart of this story. So this is Henrietta Lacks. She was born in Virginia. Her family worked as tobacco farmers. Like so many others, she moved north to Maryland, looking for a better life. She was a mother, raised 5 children. But then in 1951, her life took a tragic turn. At just 31 years old, she was diagnosed with a really, really aggressive cervical cancer. And sadly, she passed away later that same year. And right here, this is the moment. This is where our story really begins. While she was getting treatment, a doctor took 2 little samples of tissue from her cervix, one from the tumor, one from healthy tissue. And here's the thing, she was never told. Nobody asked her permission. Now, we have to be clear, this was unfortunately pretty common back then. But what happened with her samples? Well, that was anything but common. You see, once they got into the lab, Henrietta's cells started doing something that had baffled scientists for years, something no other human cells had ever done. They just kept growing. They refused to die. So to really grasp how big a deal this was, you need to understand this huge problem scientists were facing. Before 1951, trying to keep human cells alive in a lab was a nightmare. You'd get them in a petri dish, they'd divide a few times, and then they'd just die. It's the normal aging process. So this idea of an immortal cell line, a batch of cells that just sidesteps aging and replicates forever, that was the holy grail. It meant you could have a limitless supply of cells to experiment on. So, how did her cells, which they nicknamed HeLa cells, pull this off? Well, it was like a perfect biological storm. 2 things happened. First, the very same HPV virus that gave her cancer basically hot-wired her cells. It's like it found the brakes that tell a cell to stop dividing and just cut the lines. Second, there's this enzyme called telomerase. Think of it like the little plastic tips on your shoelaces, but for your chromosomes. Normally they wear down, but in her cells, this enzyme went into hyperdrive, just constantly rebuilding those protective caps. It was, literally, a biological fountain of youth at the cellular level. And the result of all this? HeLa cells aren't just immortal, they're like supercells. They're incredibly tough. Get this, under the right lab conditions, a batch of HeLa cells can double in number every 24 hours. Just incredible. And just like that, because of this incredible property, HeLa cells went from being some weird lab curiosity to becoming maybe the single most important tool in all of medical research for the entire 20th century. I mean, it's almost impossible to overstate their impact. The polio vaccine couldn't have been developed without HeLa cells. They were the very first human cells ever to be cloned. They were the foundation for so much of our research on viruses, from HPV to HIV. They literally sent them to space. Yeah, to see what zero gravity does to human cells. And it all comes full circle. They were even involved in the research for the mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. But there's a twist. The very thing that made HeLa cells so amazing, that aggressive, nonstop growth, well, it also created a massive hidden problem for scientists everywhere. And in 1966, a geneticist comes along and drops what everyone started calling the HeLa bomb. So what was the bomb?
Gartler showed that tons of famous cell lines being used in labs weren't what scientists thought they were at all. You thought you were studying breast cancer cells? Nope, that was HeLa. Those prostate cells? HeLa again. These cells were so tough they could literally float across a room on a dust particle, land in another petri dish, and just take over. It was a crisis. It meant years of research, millions and millions of dollars, had all been based on studying the wrong thing.
So while the entire scientific community is freaking out about this contamination problem, Henrietta's own family, they're completely in the dark. They have no idea any of this is happening. And for them, a very different kind of fight was just beginning. A fight for recognition, for dignity, and for justice.
Seriously, let this sink in for a minute. For over 20 years, while their mother's cells were being bought, sold, cloned, even shot into space, her own kids had no clue. They were grieving her loss, while in a very real, biological way, she was still alive and powering a scientific revolution that they were completely shut out of.
And the scale of this, it's just staggering. I mean, scientists estimate that if you took all the HeLa cells ever grown and put them on a scale, it would be over 50 million metric tons. Laid end to end, they would wrap around the Earth more than 3 times. Think about that. There are far more of Henrietta's cells alive in labs right now than were ever in her own body when she was alive. It's just wild. And the ethical problems, they didn't just stop in 1951. It gets worse. In the 70s, when scientists were trying to sort out that whole contamination mess, they went to Henrietta's kids to get blood samples, but they didn't really explain why. They didn't get proper, informed consent. A lot of the family members thought they were just getting a health checkup, maybe being tested for cancer. So from their perspective, it was history repeating itself. It was the exact same violation all over again. They were being used for research, not for their own health. Things really came to a head in 2013. That's when the entire HeLa genetic code, the genome, was published online for anyone to see. And once again, nobody asked the family. This was a huge breach of privacy. Why? Because her genome contains information about her living kids and grandkids, their predispositions for certain diseases. The public outcry was massive, and it led to a really important agreement with the NIH. And for the first time, the very first time, the Lacks family was finally given a seat at the table. They got a voice in deciding who gets to use their mother's, their grandmother's genetic information. And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. Because that fight for justice is still happening today, and it's continuing to break new ground in the legal world. So that settlement with Thermo Fisher, that was really just the opening shot. The Lacks estate has filed more of these unjust enrichment lawsuits. And in another case, a judge made a really critical decision. The company tried to get the case thrown out, saying, hey, this happened too long ago. But the judge said no. That's huge. It basically means that the excuse of it was a long time ago might not work anymore for companies facing up to these kinds of historical wrongs. And so this whole incredible story leaves us with a really big, really important question, a question we all have to think about. The cells of Henrietta Lacks have saved an untold number of lives. They've generated billions of dollars. Her story forces us, all of us, to ask, what do we owe the people whose bodies become the building blocks for medical miracles? What is fair? And that answer, well, that's still being fought for in courtrooms and in laboratories right now.